my friend. It's so good to see you, and I'm so happy to have you on MyFlora Fridays. Um, we've known each other for what, like a year and a half, probably ish.
Say about that.
Couple years. So you're in New Jersey. I'm in New Jersey. We met at a New Jersey meetup, and I think you recognized me from my sassiness on LinkedIn, which was pretty funny. Um,
You mean I had a fangirl moment? Yes, I did.
That's so funny. Um, but yeah, we've been friends now for, going on a couple of years, and we have collaborated on a couple things. You teach cannabis courses at Stockton University and Rowan University, right? And interestingly, and I think this is so fascinating, your specialty is in communications, right? And I'm not a very good communicator. I don't think I'm a very good communicator, but I am kind of, enamored by your ability to talk and stuff. I saw you on the Montel Let's Be Blunt, and I was like, oh my God, she's such a good speaker. But anyway, it's really good to have you here. I love talking to you all the time. But you know you better than I know you, so I would love for you to tell everybody who you are, what you do, and what brought you to cannabis, what you're doing here.
That's a lot. And
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. And thank you for the conversation. And you are a good communicator. You are an effective communicator. I always enjoy spending time talking with you, and I always learn new things from you every time, no exception. And I did have that fangirl moment at one of the like cannabis networking events in South Jersey because you have this really practical, informed voice that you bring to the table in the digital space. And it's still wild to me that LinkedIn tends to be the friendliest, although some days it feels not so friendly when it comes to the algorithms these days. But what are you going to do? And I appreciate that you bring science and data and fact to the conversation with everything that you do. And that's why I've really enjoyed working with you and learning from you over all this time. And that is why when I saw you and your pink hair, I screamed because maybe it wasn't a scream, maybe it was more like a yelp. Because I was like, oh, I know who you are. And I was genuinely and still remain genuinely excited to talk with you because so much of my background focuses on like what would be considered the humanities approach to the topic of cannabis. So I leave the science and the plant stuff to the smart folks like you and all of the other folks that are in cannabis science and can bring the aspects of the chemical compounds and the botany and the growing techniques. And I love to learn about that. And I feel as though I'm seeking that out a lot of the time to widen my understanding of the whole process, the whole industry, the whole set of considerations, because that actually ends up helping the work that I'm doing in a lot of analysis of communications and how we talk about this plant. And that humanities approach, prior to coming to cannabis, I was working for an organization that focused on public humanities. And the public humanities, when we hear the word humanities, a lot of the time we think of college, right? Like we think of college classroom and I have to take these humanities classes. And the disciplines that are most often affiliated with the humanities are the disciplines like history, philosophy, language, and really disciplines that require communication exchange that help us to better understand humans and the human experience and how and why we interact the way that we do. And that really broadens understanding of topics that are then related because cannabis is like the most fascinating topic I've ever looked at when it comes to the humanities because it's been so controversial for such a long time. So a lot of the work that I've done, a lot of the work that I do in classrooms and for programs that I tend to refer to as public cannabis education initiatives really take on that, like, let's dive into history. And not to say that the history nugs that are out there, right? We hear about Anslinger, we hear about Nixon, we hear about Reagan, we hear about Dare. Those are all really helpful touchstones so that we can understand what we're looking at. But we actually can get much further in understanding how we arrived at today and the ongoing controversy if we widen that and move through ancient history into the Middle Ages, into more contemporary times, and see the fascinating patterns that emerge around this particular plant. So yes, I have been doing some teaching for quite some time, and really brought the teaching skill set into the cannabis space probably like in the last 5 years, and then really started to develop courses for community education, for higher education in classroom. And then the other thing that's been really wonderful to work on is helping industry understand how we can look to history and human interaction with this plant to make good decisions now. So I don't know that I answered your very, like, detailed, complex question fully, but there was just a little bit of everything in there.
Yeah, it was, yeah, who you are, what you do, and why you're here, right?
Yeah, heck
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well,
And I
I
love
think
being here.
same Z's. Like, I think that cannabis is arguably the most fascinating plant on the planet.
Mm.
Like, I could probably confidently say there are very few people on earth that wouldn't recognize a cannabis leaf. Like,
I can see
right?
that.
Yeah. And the use that we have shared with the plant for the last 10,000 years, like going back, like you said, to ancient history, and looking at all of the things that we've used cannabis for, the places that we've moved it to as we migrated around the world. Like, we took our cannabis with us for medicine, for fuel, for fiber, all kinds of stuff. And it's such a long history, right? And I mean, I think that carnivorous plants are pretty cool, but I think that I mean, potatoes are pretty rad. I love potatoes. But I think cannabis is probably the coolest plant on the planet.
Here, here. And when you said carnivorous plant, in case you're wondering, I did see the plant from Little Shop of Horrors like flash in my head. And like when I start to talk about the plant and really kind of look at what the base level of knowledge is for most folks. Now I'm working with different audiences on a regular basis, and the college student plant overview and then like what that means today can be similar or very different than like public audiences in some of these public programs. And what's funny is, like you say, there's not a lot of folks who wouldn't know about like the leaf, right? The cannabis leaf. But I'm still finding today, despite the fact that so many people know what that leaf is and what it represents, that there are people that don't realize that that's not the part that you're consuming for the high part. That this is an aspect of the plant that's become very like visually identifiable. But I feel like there's always stuff to do and there's always work to be done, because there's so many different entry points to the learning aspect, which is you might know what that plant is and that's associated with marijuana or cannabis, but being able to help somebody understand the different parts of the plant and why, for example, we have so many words for this one plant,
Hmm.
because that ends up becoming a really interesting talking point. And I kind of keep like a mental track of what folks kind of know and don't know out there. And I don't know about you, but in my experience, the thing that drives a lot of conversation, when even talking about the basics, is if I had to estimate out of every 10 people, um, like 8, maybe 9, here in America, don't understand the tension that exists behind the federal Schedule 1 categorization and the effective prohibition that accompanies that, and the state by state legalization. And like for all of us in cannabis, like we know this inside and out, and we know, all of the issues, problems, challenges, obstacles that exist because of that. And it ends up becoming really a really good. Hi, Dottie.
Sorry.
No apologies needed. Hi, Dottie. You wanted to get in on some cannabis chat?
Yeah.
So, like in general, I think that, talking about the basics and like, what can you tell me about this plant? What can you tell me about this leaf? What can you tell me about consumption methods? And then early on in conversations in classrooms and public spaces, we tend to or at least I tend to gravitate pretty quickly to that disconnect between the Category 1 classification and the state by state legalization, and then that typically ends up developing into some interesting conversation, because as people start to unpack that, they say, but wait, that doesn't, what do you mean there's zero medicinal value based on that categorization?
Mhm.
Isn't there medical marijuana or medical cannabis out there? And then we start to unpack that and really let some of that natural curiosity emerge.
I think it's fascinating that there is such a wide range of knowledge about cannabis, ranging from I don't know shit all the way up to what we could call experts and in different fields. Like so, there's not just a cannabis expert. Like you have to be more specific than that. Like, what are you an expert in? Are you in healthcare? Are you in cultivation? Are you, a breeder? Are you a communicator and a lawyer? Like there's so many aspects of it. So just to say you're a cannabis expert is not enough information, right? And you know, actually you and we met with a company that wanted to do genetic testing on people to figure out like what kind of cannabis would work for their sort of genetics and their physiology and stuff like that. And I thought it was, you probably remember this. I thought it was really
Oh,
funny
I remember.
that they had chosen a male plant for all of their branding. I'm like, why would you, me being the blunt person that I am, why would you choose a male plant for all of your branding? Um, being testing for cannabis, this is not the plant that we use, and they had no idea that that was a male plant, and b like their branding was so off. I'm like, what? You just don't even know like basic 101 shit about cannabis.
Well, and that was wild because it was based simply on aesthetics, and that that might be okay for someone that doesn't know. So someone in the industry is going to look at that and do kind of like that head scratch thing, and then that automatically goes to what is being offered really as up to the quality that one would deserve for that kind of investment in testing. And then the other side is like, we have, I don't know about you, but every day I feel like there's work to be done, because like we have to undo all of these kinds of gaps in education and knowledge, and then not just fill in the gaps when knowledge is absent, but like reprogram a lot of the inaccurate misinformation, which we can look to history and see why we've arrived here, and the significant evidence that supports the fact that there's a lot to undo. And I feel like the public, like John and Gene Q public out there, deserve better. And so it's seeing everything as a teaching opportunity. And in that particular instance, I was glad that you pointed out that there was a disconnect there. And I think that also comes from a level of also like honoring and respecting the plant. Like, not to take it too much into Hallmark movie, but like this plant is unbelievably powerful. It's been around for a long time. It's been used for medicine, as sacrament, as elevation, to look at the world differently. And would we do that kind of thing where we just kind of toss something up there because it looks nice for something else? I don't know what the response from that particular entity would say, but they're the plant deserves, a lot more than sometimes we're giving it, because it sits in this strange space. And some of the time I try and think about any other product that has come to market, and like partially come to market, right? Because right now, 70 to 80% of the United States, DC, and the territories have some form of medicinal access, and it's not uniform, but you're talking, and so the majority has some access to some form of medicinal. And then about half, I think we're at like just shy of half, have some sort of recreational or adult use
Mhm.
program. And even that, like, there's big inconsistencies there. So like, we have to work harder all the time at, kind of trying to put good information out into the world, because it ends up being shrouded in confusion. And that's not even, taking into account all of like the decades of problematic messaging that some of us have experienced. And then when like you put all of that together, you're like, well, no wonder we sit in so much gray all the time. And those that know work so hard to to provide good information and accurate information. It's every day there's more stuff to be done, I think.
There is more stuff to be done, and there's so much to learn. And, thinking back to those people that we met that used the male plant in their branding, I mean, I feel like, ugh, and we were talking about this earlier, um, the disrespect or the kind of, what do I want to say, dismissal of people in the cannabis industry, like, me trying to get a job. I can take cannabis off my resume, but you scratch the surface and cannabis is, I'm swimming in cannabis. I can't shake that, right? And I will be dismissed from even, from the applicant pool immediately because of my association with cannabis. But again, thinking back to those people that were literally trying to work with cannabis to help their customer base, which was going to be, elderly folk and things like that.
Mhm.
The first thing they said to me when I walked in the door was, "You're a doctor?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not a medical doctor, but yes, I have a doctorate in cannabis genetics." Like, that was an immediate, like, dismissal of me, right? And I don't know if it was the cannabis or the pink hair, and it doesn't matter, right? But that dismissal, that immediate dismissal is really, really common in the cannabis space. For, if you, it's so still so taboo, even though we have such a, I mean, it's almost legal in every state in some form.
Right. And like I would imagine, and once I think there has to be a level of intentionality, and I talk with students about this because I want to be as upfront as possible when they're trying to like figure out their career trajectory. And I'm super proud to be in Osprey. I'm super proud to be working with Stockton in there. So they started out with a minor, and then they also had a community education program. And that was, I think that was pre-vid. I think that was in the before time. And then in the after time, um, then they were able to stand up the hemp and cannabis business management undergraduate degree program. So they
Hmm.
expanded that so that there was building on that minor, getting a cannabis minor to a full-fledged undergraduate degree, which is not common across the country for all of the reasons that we have talked about and that one can think of. And I've noticed that in higher ed, there is concern because of that federal intersection. And that federal funding concern is pervasive, and that's reality because it is still a category 1. So when you think about what the options are, I'm really proud that New Jersey has a university that, has really wanted to offer a program that aligns with the needs of the Garden State, because we're going to need specialized workforce and specialized professionals that have to do with all of those categories that you just listed, to understand the complexities of the industry. And I can even, remember having some discussions with other folks in higher ed at the time, and even with all of that logic, there was still some resistance from some folks saying like, well, yeah, but it's just weed. Like, what do you need to know? You just smoke it. It's just weed. You get the munchies. Like, well, all of those things might be true. It is sometimes referred to as weed. Sometimes you do get the munchies. But there's so much more to consider. And I have found it to be a perspective that is often just bogged down by the weight of bias, and their own personal viewpoints that have to do with like much of what I look at in these classes and public programs, where if you don't, once you start to like pull at the thread and then start to see like that this is like a legitimate industry, and that there really does need to be a trained and one of the most restricted products out there. And to go back to where I was just a few moments ago, we have not been able to come up with another product like this that's partially come to market in this way. I don't know if you've ever come up with anything that's like analogous. Sometimes people talk about Bitcoin in the same kind of way, but it's not the same, because Bitcoin's not a consumable. I think there's too much difference there. Some people will talk about the internet and the arrival of this form of digital communication. But as far as like a tangible, even consumable or not consumable product, I don't know that there's been anything else. So obviously it needs its own playbook. Like and it's got all of these other sets of rules it has to pay attention to, because it sits in that gray area. So
Maybe,
I don't
maybe,
know.
maybe the invention of prepackaged foods. Like TV dinners and stuff like that, where you have to add a whole bunch of preservatives and things like that. So then maybe packaging and labeling, you know, yeah, like in the 50s and 60s, TV dinners and prepackaged foods, dehydrated foods, things that were easy to make. Like those were never around before that. And so we've got all of these like preservatives and chemicals that we need to add, flavorants,
Mm,
colors, things like that. And I think that I wasn't in the industry. Probably wasn't even born yet when that happened, but I feel like that maybe that, or yeah, maybe that. And also, tangential, but a little off topic. Um, when we think about things like autism and obesity these days that are, seem to be an epidemic, and we can't really nail down what is happening, or even male
mm,
pattern baldness, like men are going bald in their teens. My mom, the incredibly smart lady that she is, thinks that potentially all of these issues are actually stemming from our grandmothers and what they went through when they were getting pregnant with our parents, because
mm.
at your mom's ovaries were formed in your grandmother when
Yeah.
she was, and so whatever your grandmother was going through when she was pregnant, and that's right around the time for many of us in Gen X and millennials, that prepackaged foods were coming to market, fast food, things like that. And my mom thinks that that is the cause of a lot of things that we're seeing that weren't around when our parents and our grandparents were younger. Um, so and we can't go back and like get data from that. Like, what did you eat? What did your grandma eat? Like, how often? Like, but yeah, I don't know. That was
Well,
kind
I
of
mean
off
that.
topic, but
No, it makes me want to time travel even more. And like I think that there's a lot of alignment there and a lot to unpack there.
Mm-hmm.
But also like on the to be the devil's advocate side, like there wasn't a controversy that would have, because it was like food but in a different form, or like food with different parts, even if like nobody was thinking about it like that. Whereas this one, like it, for this product to constantly be sitting in a an area of a source of immorality, depravity, criminality, like where there was this association that
Mm.
has been so prevalent. That's the other thing that like we start to unpack, where it's like if we looked at history and went back further, like, and I'm not saying that it's, we focus on Nixon, Anslinger, Marijuana Tax Act of 37, like things like that. And then sometimes we will go back a little bit further when it comes to like Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906 and what was happening at that point, in the turn of the century with opium and the global population, the global leaders coming together and looking at um, all of the problematic issues that were coming from usage of opium products. And because we can learn a lot about the way that the cannabis history evolved from the what happened with opium. So we have to go kind of pre-cannabis and figure out what the global powers at that point were saying. But when you go back, like let's say you go 600 years or 800 years or 1100 years, and we only have so much documentation from that point that we are aware of. So we tend to go to the same examples, but it's just over and over and over again with the same thing. Like different players, different authority, and the concept of religion, and this is again like a very public humanities kind of approach because it's multidisciplinary. So before the government entities were the ones that had the concern and were like, we have concern, this is that we believe that this is a root of evil in XYZ society 600 years ago, and you had this different government in a different part of the world saying the same thing 700 or 800 years ago. There was like a time period where that started to switch because it was a lot of religious authority, not as much centralized governmental authority, but religious authority questioning and really vilifying this plant. And so we haven't been able to get away from that. And there are certain, I'm not saying there aren't certain populations and chunks that knew better, just like today. Like where they're saying, like I hear what you're saying, but I don't have any life evidence that backs this up. What I do have is the evidence that consuming this plant in whatever shape or form alleviates my whatever it is, inflammation, problems post childbirth, epilepsy, things like that. So you ended up having people that could assert like this is making a difference. They lack the science that we do today to be able to explore it. So I'm gonna have to give this the food preservative and prepackaged food more thought because I think there's quite a few parallels. Um, but I want to find either it does not exist, like there is no comparable something, or the right one that indicates that had a bad reputation from the beginning. Like that's the thing. This reputation part continues to be.
GMOs, genetic engineering and
Mm,
genetic modification, like the technology itself is not bad,
yeah.
but the way that it's being used, Roundup is a great example. So, the actual genetically modified crop is not going to harm you, but they've modified it so that they can spray the shit out of the weeds, and the plant that you want is still going to survive through that. The spraying the shit out of the weeds is introducing toxins and stuff into not only the area, but like it's leaching into the soil, which then leaches into the waterways, which then kills other plants. And, it can drift over into your neighbor's crops and kill their plants that are not GMO ready, they're not Roundup ready. But the plant itself is just fine. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to do something to your DNA. It's not going to give you cancer. It's the things that they're putting on it that are. And people are very against GMOs. Like I don't want anything GMO, like at all. And it's like, but it's not the organism that's the bad thing. It's the things that they do to those modified organisms that is the bad thing. And, you know, to the point where they have some pretty tight regulations around GMOs and labeling rules and things that you can do and things that you can't do. Like you can't insert, a gene into a organism that's gonna make it glow and cause cancer. Like that's pretty, irresponsible. And so maybe GMOs and almost, like there's such a loud voice around how bad GMOs are, but
Yeah.
yet golden rice can stop children from going blind due to lack of vitamin A. And it's that could save, a lot of pain, suffering, blah blah blah. GMOs could save the world. We could be able to, grow crops in arid climates or in hotter areas, which will be very important with the changing climate. Like GMOs could do a lot of good, but people are so against them because they
Mhm.
think they're going to get cancer.
Well, and that is a really comparable example that now I'm gonna, because you're a genius, I'm gonna take that and rework it and make sure that I have all my ducks in a row, and then help people to understand that, because you're spot on, and it has to do with that automatic association when you hear the word, that your brain, our central processing units are so amazing. But are you going to be able to go back through the, like the ticker tape in your head and say, okay, every time I heard about GMOs, every headline, every conversation, every science class, every label in the grocery store where I ran into my neighbor who was then talking about how terrible GMOs are as I went to reach for my produce, like when you go back through, how many times of exposure have there been to the concept, and then what was the context around it? So if I am here at XYZ this old, an exennial, actually I consider myself to be an exennial, and I get made fun of a lot for claiming that, because I like to take the best parts of Gen X and millennial, or and I like exennial better than calling myself an elder millennial, because then that makes me sound like I belong in a video game, I think. Maybe Zelda in particular, which then dates me as an exennial. Um,
Well, I'm at the tail end of Gen X, so we're like almost meeting.
and that means if you're not an elder, what does it mean when you're like at the,
I
what's
don't
the
know,
opposite of an
a
elder?
baby X. I don't know.
That's I don't know that that makes a lot of sense.
A
But
juvenile,
yeah,
a toddler. I don't
I'm
know.
going to start looking at you thinking of baby X from now on. Um, but so like if I went through and did the tally, how many exposures have I had to the words, to the letters GMO, right? And what was the surrounding context of that? And while I think that's seriously, I can't wait to give this some more thought and do a little bit of research. But what if we try and go back and unpack how many instances we have heard about cannabis and marijuana growing up, right? And then you have this plant that I talk about it in my classes. The DEA in the before time came out with a list. It was 353 words, and a lot of them were like the code words and like the slang words and street words for cannabis. And some of them were wild. Um, but we have all of these terms for this same plant. So then we have to get the like amalgamation of all of that. Like, how many times have you heard the word marijuana? What was the context? Who was saying it? Where were you at? How important was that influence? Um, and at what point in your formative years were you? For a lot of us, because we heard a lot of anti-marijuana messaging when we were growing up. If we were to do that, um, if we had the capacity to do that, I think we'd start to understand that for some people, immediate, like, oh, bad word, bad association,
Mhm.
even though there's a lot of untruth that was there. And actually, for the Stockton students that I work with, to help them understand and make it like a, how does a college student get their information about this particular ancient plant medicine? And I talk about this a lot, is that I look at headlines, I look at media, I look at what is happening. And for Stockton's classes in general, I spend time comparing a more contemporary, daily newspaper in the 70s, and the one that I rely on at this point is the New York Times. And then I look at the school newspaper and of the same year, and it's like, how were the words used differently? And what the students start to understand is that when you use the word marijuana, and I was only looking at the word marijuana, I wasn't including a lot of other terminology, and cannabis was not really a thing then.
Mhm.
We've really more adopted cannabis, I would say, in the last 10 to 15 years in like everyday speak, even though it is the more accurate term that has a bunch of history behind it. Um, the student newspapers were essentially, when the words were brought up in 1971, it was how to pass drug tests. And it was tied to topics that had to do with Vietnam War, and being anti-establishment, and in a much more, I'm not going to say positive, but a way that made sense to the how college students were interacting with that. And the word narc came up a lot. But if you look at the same year and you look at the New York Times, um, I believe at the end of the day, there were over 600 uses of the word marijuana in that one year that I looked at. And I had to, get rid of a bunch that were not of merit, right? Like, but substantially, there were over 500 usages of the word marijuana that year. And when you looked at the headlines, for example, headline stories or above the fold stories or feature stories, um, it was so negative, like all the time. And if you're a student right now, and you're a young adult, you're thinking about ways that we get information that have to do with, like, we have more access to digital communication and information than we ever have. But it wasn't the same in the 70s. The newspaper was it. The national nightly, like, news programming was your jam. Like, you didn't have an infinite amount of sources talking about the same topic at your fingertips. And that usage over and over and over again, that year, you had this concept of protection of youth. There was fear-based messaging all the time. And if you're an individual who was, coming of age in the early 70s, and you are exposed to these headlines, and then your youth pastor saying the same thing, and the president is saying the same thing, and then your parents and your family are saying the same thing, like, no wonder we've all arrived today at, a time where, if you were, born in 1950 something, coming of age in 1970 something, you're approaching your 70s. And so it totally makes sense that you get this immediate reaction. I would love to be able to go back and analyze that internal ticker tape, but we don't have that or time travel yet.
Not yet. So, that's true. That marijuana it's been ingrained in us, that the word marijuana, like, it brings to mind, that girl that deflates on the couch because she's stoned, or this is your brain on drugs with the fried egg and all
Right.
that. But, and you said that cannabis is the more accurate word, and I have to push back on that, because the word marijuana has been used for long before it was ever mentioned in the United States, long before the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, long before the whole racist campaign. It was in the Mexican pharmacopoeia in the 1860s, 70s, and it has a very specific definition. And the definition is the flowering tops of the female plant that are prepared for smoking. And so I don't think cannabis is a more accurate word, because the word cannabis, short for cannabis sativa, that's a whole plant. Do we use the whole plant for consumption? No, no, we don't. Do we use the males? No, we don't. Hemp is also cannabis. And so I see cannabis as more of like a colloquial um umbrella term, just like we use the word dog. right? Dogs, we don't use the Latin, genus to call dogs dogs. We don't say canis. Oh, I'm gonna go pick my canis up from
We're
the
walking
vet.
penis today.
I'm gonna go pick my canis up from the vet. Like they're dogs, right? That's the colloquial word that we use. And I feel like now we've made it confusing because we're using cannabis as the colloquial term for the female flowers that we consume, but it is also the genus that encompasses all these other plants all over the world, be it wild, cultivated, hemp, marijuana, whatever. And I feel like it's not more accurate, it's less accurate than the term marijuana. And people are shy away from the word marijuana because it has been used historically, specifically in the United States, to drive, this campaign that initially started out as a racist, campaign. It got rid of all the cannabis that we used to carry in our medicine cabinets, the tinctures and stuff that says, cannabis indica. Um, and now everybody associates marijuana with racism and bad things. And I'm like, but we did that, and white Americans did that. Before that, a whole bunch of people, not just in Latin America, but over into Africa, used words like marijuana or very similar to marijuana to describe this very specific thing that they used for medicine, for fun, for consumption, right? And I think it's kind of sad that that we're erasing this perfectly wonderful word that has a really rich history and is tied to so many different cultures.
I hear
Off
you.
soapbox.
I hear you. But when you go back and look, because the word marijuana has, I think, as we can go back to theoretically the 1700s, maybe, right? Because I wasn't there. And while a lot of people associate marijuana with being a Mexican term of Mexican descent, and that's what's in a lot of the history. And you'll look at different versions, and you'll say like translations are saying of Mary stuff or of Mary, like that kind of thing. Um, you don't have like that wide standing usage, and you had cannabis going back to, wasn't it, I always mispronounce his name, it was on Medica Materia. So Dr. Dioscorides, who is the Greek doctor who listed cannabis emero and cannabis agria in what was like the, an herbal, like an herbal guidebook, almost like a pharmacopoeia. I don't think it was officially called a pharmacopoeia at the time. And that was like 70 AD, like somewhere in there. And so you have, and it was spelled with a K actually. And that makes sense, like when you look at it and look at like Latin translations and things like that. And so cannabis ends up kind of coming through a lot of that language and looking at that plant, where cannabis sativa was more often found in texts. But and I find, and I'm not sure, what other thoughts you might have, but Indian hemp at that point was like far more interchangeable as far as other like words used around the world. Um, and so it wasn't until maybe the 1700s, and most people will settle on a Mexican influence, although there are a few scholars that will pick out different parts of the world that were using a word or similar. So those are scholars that come back and say, it was probably Mexico, but there's a chance it was coming from this part of, I've read about the Caribbean, I've read about coming out of Africa
Mm.
and some other
The
spots in
word
the
came
world.
over with the slave trade. So that's one of the theories out there, is that
Yeah.
when we brought slaves over, they brought their word, and it wasn't like cannabis, like how that's not how they said it. They, and there's a whole thing like, and you can follow it going through into the West Indies and the, Haiti and sugarcane and then into the Americas, which would include, bringing it over to Mexico and,
Mhm.
picking it up there and even into South America. They had the black folks coming over from Africa as well. And so there's pretty good, I mean, that's a pretty good theory, I think, that it came over from, and it, that would make it a lot older than what we even thought.
Well, and I think that part of the issue with any of this like historical discovery is that because this plant is always shrouded in some sort of controversy, like it that's just a consistency that I think has to do more with human aspects than not, where the people and if you go and look, the pattern that emerges is that the people in the positions of power or authority
Hmm.
had concerns about individuals entering an altered state, which would then encourage thinking differently. And if you're thinking differently, that means that you can imagine a different world. You can imagine a different life. And like, I sit here in these modern times and I enjoy air conditioning and indoor plumbing and frappuccinos and all of these
Flushing
kinds of
toilets.
things. Right. And you're like, oh my gosh, could you imagine, 500 years ago, how much different life was? And this plant provided a temporary escape with little to no negative repercussion, right? Like it wasn't going to be a permanent state of imagining a different anything or feeling that feeling of euphoria and never being able to return to your standard life. Like, so because you had access to even that temporary state of being, like I know that it sounds a little far-fetched, but that's how like revolution happens. That's how change happens when you have someone that is inspired to imagine and pursue a different set of circumstance. And so
Hmm.
no wonder something like this that could undermine authority and undermine the masses belief and then you get into like topics like how does this intersect with religion and spirituality, whereas you saw instances of religious leaders not wanting folks to have access to this plant because it was so effective in healing and helping and alleviating human suffering that they didn't want association with humans being able to provide access to this plant, because then it would undermine this. Well, you got somebody upstairs doing this hard work, like
Mm.
you got to associate the healing and the alleviation of suffering with some deity that's the crux or the underpinning of whatever that like doctrine is. And you actually saw some gender issues pop up because it was a lot of times women like midwives, people that were helping women through before, during, and after childbirth, that were then deemed something that was uh, dangerous and in some instances demonic, because they could provide this plant that would help individuals. And then it would be like, well, the plant did that. And it could undermine what people are thinking when we talk about authority, and that there is some higher power that is running the show, and that this plant is not part of it. And the people that would provide some of this were deemed like heretics, like they were the dangerous people. And that's why you see these edicts over and over again from initially it was more religion and then it became government, where it's like that is a no-no, and we want this outlawed, we want this removed because of all of this power that it gave to individuals on a consumptive level, and then the people who were providing it. So, I mean, once you start to look through, and that's kind of what we talk about in classrooms and public spaces, because while we hear about Anslinger and Nixon, the reality is that we can look to other places in the world and we can see this over and over again, consistent pattern. And like I hear what you're saying about cannabis versus marijuana. I very much do. Um, and sometimes I wish we could settle on some things. Like we could all make the decision, like, this is what we're going to do now, because it's become even confusing. Like in the state of New Jersey, if you're in law enforcement and you're talking about a crime being committed, you're talking about marijuana. And that's in the regs. Like that's the terminology that is required to be used, which is in direct opposition to what started out as the medical and adult use or recreational marijuana program, and now I'm noticing that the official language has changed over into cannabis. And this is like where so much of the confusion lies.
Hmm.
So we need to, and that the book by David Paleshuk, if I'm saying his last name correctly, Cannabis versus Marijuana, it does a good job tackling like all of this language nuance and why it matters so much. So
It just
I
gets so
understand.
confusing. And I think, I've written about this and I've given lectures about this, that it becomes really confusing, especially when you're speaking and not
Mm-hmm.
writing it out. If you say cannabis, it's like, which one are you talking about? Right?
Right.
And and being somebody who has worked in both the marijuana and the hemp industries, talking to me and just saying cannabis is not like, I'm just like, what? You're gonna have to give me some more information because I don't know what you're talking about. And there's so much confusion in both the cannabis and the hemp spaces now, right? But I've talked about this with other guests as well. The whole hemp thing and the gray area that a lot of people are operating in, and they're actually just selling regular old weed, the sticky icky. They're calling it THCA hemp. That, my friends, is marijuana. It
Right.
just hasn't. There's a loophole, and if you don't know about it, I'll tell you all about it. But um, as you were going through your thoughts there, I was having thoughts too. I remember when I was writing my dissertation, Americans are very American centric, and they think that, oh, we made the plant illegal, and the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, that's when it became, well, that's not when it became illegal, but like, we're very American centric, and we think that we made it illegal, and prohibition is from Anslinger and blah blah blah, and not realizing that, prohibition, and like you were saying, other entities have given strict prohibition, like even Napoleon. He had some pretty brutal um punishments if he found any of his soldiers smoking marijuana. And there was another, I want to say it was some czar or something, like the punishment for smoking or consuming marijuana was to pull out all your teeth. Like, dude, what? But yeah, like, they don't want to have people free thinking and thinking outside the box and being creative, and and the religious thing where they want God to be the one who is, responsible for all the good and the healing and stuff. And what popped into my brain is something, I used to have this diary in high school where people would write like little sayings or whatever, and somebody wrote, um God is perfect, man is not, man made whiskey, God made pot. And I'm like, yeah, like, God made that plant. If that's what you believe, if you believe in God, right? God put that plant on this planet for us to use, and so what's wrong with that?
I want to say it was Pope Gregory the Ninth. Um, and that was during the time of the Holy Inquisition.
Mhm.
Anyone that had cannabis was, you were donezo, all of it had to be destroyed. And if you were someone that was, and at that point, it's just a staple in the healer's, medicine cabinet, the apothecary, the shaman, like whoever it was. It was just part of the kit, along with what I would imagine. I wasn't there, but based on what I've read, garlic is plant medicine, and onions are plant medicine, and you have all kinds of herbs and
Of
different
milk
things
of
that
opium flowers.
right.
That's freaking,
So it's like this was
Morty.
just part of it, and all of a sudden there's this decree that has to do, directly with this uncomfortability with being able to heal oneself. And that's not even taking into account the altered state component either, because we only have so much record. And I think I was starting to talk about this earlier and then interrupted myself, which is pretty standard. um when it comes to this particular plant medicine, we, because it's always had the controversy, we don't have particularly good records, because in some instances, it was dangerous to record this. It was dangerous to be associated with it. And you're sure as heck not going to like write down what you're doing with it and then pass it along. So that's why we tend to look at the same examples over and over again. Like in literature, we look at the travels of Marco Polo a lot, right? Because this is where the narrative of the Islamic trained assassins end up, drugging him. And this is his
Be
travels were
totally
taking place.
transparent. I fell asleep in history class.
Yep.
All of them. All of them.
um, well, then this is going to be a new Snaffle fact for you. So the travels of Marco Polo, and what's funny is like I never knew about who Marco Polo was. The only reference for most of my life was the game that you played in the pool, right?
I know that one. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And I didn't give any thought to there being a real Marco Polo until much later in life, because I probably slept through that class in high school too. That's my guess. But I never really paid attention to this concept that there was this real man named Marco Polo who in the 1200s ended up doing some travel, and global travel was at that point still like pretty rare, and more global travel starts to really ramp up in the 14, 15 and into the 1600s, ironically because of cannabis, because of the cannabis plant. And it was hemp that is used to make really, really strong, durable fibers, really strong, durable rope. And so cannabis does contribute to the cannabis plant and many other things gaining more travel around the world, more global travel. So he documents his adventures. And at this point, even documentation, like the printing press didn't hit the scene until sometime around there. I'd have to look up the date for that. And so he recounts this story about this group of trained Islamic murdering assassins, criminals who do terrible things. And he is drugged at some point, and he is with them and attributes all of their maybe not all, but a driving force behind why they engage in all of this criminal activity, because of the hash, the cannabis concentrate that they are consuming. And anybody that knows cannabis, right, knows knows cannabis for real, not just what they've heard in headlines that has, added to what went on the ticker tape there, knows that when you consume, it's not likely that you, as a group, right? Everybody's physiological, body is different. The mental state that you bring to the consumption, all of that's different. But it's not something that inspires you because of its interaction with what we now know as the ECS, the endocannabinoid system, to get up and go like do things like in the same way that other substances do. Right. You're like, oh,
I'm going to go overthrow a government. Yeah.
I'm going to sit here and smile. And so he writes about this group that he refers to, and I never know whether or not I'm getting this pronunciation correctly, because again, I wasn't there, but the Hashishans. Like he puts the word hash into the name of these Islamic, terror murdering driven outfit. And this essentially becomes a key point in literature that then puts out into the world, which then travels more as global travel continues. And so now this substance, this hash substance that's made from the cannabis plant, is associated with crime and depravity and immorality. And we know that that's, without having been there, and time travel is not perfected yet, we know that it's very unlikely that whatever they were consuming was probably not solely hash, and that maybe there was some other substance that turned energy up, and the desire to be terrible, by all accounts, up. But it didn't change the fact that that's what stuck. And it wasn't hard for that to stick because you have all of these other instances, this historical support that says this was just reinforcement of the other stuff that was happening. And then, following that point, in Africa, in Spain, in Egypt, in India, you in Britain, in the UK, you had usage of this plant, and then all of it just kept getting smushed together and smushed together. And we only have so many, touchstone texts and manuscripts and documentation to look towards. So that's why Marco Polo comes up so frequently when you look at historical references, because this is what shapes the narrative. And you do see some other texts that kind of start to emerge in the Middle Ages coming into more contemporary times that take a more balanced approach, where people were recording their own experimentation and documentation of that. And even some of that, like Confessions of an Opium Eater and Thomas de Quincey and those kinds of texts, they weren't as terrible. Like, it wasn't as like, let's go commit crimes, let's go harm people. But there was more exploration of what that consumption experience was like. And it very, very often it was not positive, let's say. Like, it was there, but not particularly, it didn't cast cannabis into a lovely light much of the time, which was a real bummer.
It's just so weird that there's like so much negativity. Um, you know, I think of things like, O'Shaughnessy and his work, using cannabis with elderly folks, patients, and also young children. And he was like kind of, it came across as he was kind of gobsmacked at how effective it was for so many different conditions, and how much it helped people with pain, and that, the grumpy old man is now making jokes and smiling and laughing, and just, really big personality changes. And then so O'Shaughnessy, and then which monarch was it that had her own personal doctor that would prescribe cannabis formulations for her period cramps and headaches and stuff? I can't
That
remember.
was Queen Victoria.
Queen
She was all
Victoria.
about it. And Sir John Reynolds.
Yeah.
He might have had a middle name too. I might be omitting one of his names, but he was a big proponent, and actually went so far as to there was a some sort of publication where somebody came out like anti, and he wrote a rebuttal. And he was like, let me explain to you why you were wrong.
Let me tell you
um
something.
and but so going back to Dr. O'Shaughnessy, I wanted to just throw out Canis too, because he started on dogs and then worked his way up to people, because I think that
Penises.
was on cases. And so he started with experiments on dogs, and then was like, okay, this isn't terrible. And he was seeing so much, he was so exposed in India to how, prevalent consumption was at that point, where my guess is that he did his due diligence by starting with, four-legged creatures, and then, moved on to humans. And his work was so pivotal. But then we balance this with, so you have this, and I don't know about you, but sometimes you imagine things, right? Like, so in my head, it's like him standing in the back of this giant room, like jumping up and down in the background, like waving his hands, saying, but wait, there is actual evidence to the contrary that aligns with all of the things that you just said. And when it comes down to it, so many people in that room already had the and especially in healthcare at that point, you had different perspectives based on the headlines they were exposed to, based on the messaging from whatever source they were exposed to. So some people were like, I'm sure some, of the healers of that moment were like, well, yeah, duh, we all know that. But in the same breath, you had other people saying, no, 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 I've heard that this substance is associated with all of these not so great people. And you also, part of the issue with cannabis that has come up in some research where I've looked more at messaging around it, are the realities of cannabis too. And the two things that have held cannabis back so consistently, especially since we've had such advancement in patent medicine, were the two realities that we still deal with today. And one is there's so much plant variation, like out there in the world, and all of that, like all of the chemical compound stuff that I rely on you smart scientists to be able to help me understand the nuance there. So you have so much variation when it comes to the plant itself that you could have lack of predictability, where you could have plants that look very similar but are exposed and grown in different ways, so that affects the cannabinoid and chemical compound presence. So you didn't have the same level of confidence that you could, because then that's different from around the world. And the second thing is that kind of links to that is that modality and how it's processed, and then how it's presented and consumed. It's so different in each individual body based on, the body, the physiology that's coming to whatever the consumption is. So like you had these two aspects of really, and it took a while, especially because it doesn't become associated with smoking. Like, so when we smoke it, when we inhale, when, whether it's in flower form or a concentrate form that's vaporized, you have a pretty fast onset, which is a blessing and a curse, right? Like fast onset means also like, you have a pretty predictable window of elevation afterwards. With things that were consumed, like tinctures and edibles and things like that, you also had, that physiological delay, which then affects how people assessed efficiency and efficacy, that kind of thing. So the two aspects of the realities of the plant, the serious diversity and, how the modality and how onset happened, made it kind of challenging for, and still makes it challenging for the world of science and the world of healthcare, even before we didn't have as much like practical science to explain things. Were issues that needed to be tackled. And there are a lot of folks that then look at some of the advancements in the 17 and 18 and 1900s, where, the hypodermic needle, the, rise of patent medicine and synthetic medicine and all that kind of thing, where you had just so much more predictability and more accuracy with it, which kind of opened the way to let some of that other kind of pharmaceutical take hold.
But a lot of medicine that we take isn't instant. Like if you have a headache and you take 2 Advil, you gotta wait like 20 minutes, half an hour for that to kick in, right? It's most medicine, unless you are, like you said, using a needle for intravenously, unless you're using a needle or inhaling it, most medicine is not instantaneous. You know, anaphylactic shock and you need an EpiPen. That's got to be injected. Like you're not going to take a pill for that because you'll die. Right? So I don't know. Um, yeah, the onset of action is longer if you're going to eat or have a tincture, but I feel like that's the same with just about all medicine. Um, and as you were talking about this, I was thinking about, so my friend Elizabeth Moriarty, she's a super smart lady. She makes tinctures and stuff. She's an herbalist. And she explained to me that the the reason, like the pharmaceuticals and these single molecule compounds that we've used for predictability is steeped in the patriarchy. Traditionally, women were the healers. They were,
Yeah.
they and women, just the way we are holistic kind of people. Like, we will do whole plant medicine. We will, take things, mix them together and realize what these things are doing together. Whereas men like to take things apart and figure out which part of this does this thing. Like, they'll, like disassemble a toaster and be like, oh, this is a spring and this is the this and this is the that. And they've done the same thing with medicine. And it was traditionally, men who went into the medical fields and started, being doctors and surgeons. And they, being men, that's what they do. They want to know which one thing fixes this thing and does this action. And women are not like that at all. And so the the way that we treat cannabis, you know, women like the whole, ensemble effect, the synchronicity, all of the symphony working together to create this wonderful result. Whereas men are like, no, we need to know which thing does the thing that we want it to do. Like, oh, THC is the thing. Well, THC is not the thing. Okay, well then it's CBD. That's not the thing either. No, no, it's the terpenes. Well, it's not the terpenes either. It's like, and now we're just starting to learn it's not even the, like the terpenes aren't even that big of a player either. It's more than that. And science is dominated by men, and
Mm.
they grab the low hanging fruit, right? The Let's measure the things that are in most abundant because they must do all the heavy lifting. Well, that's not true either. As women who cook, we know that abundance does not equal potency. If a cup of sugar is not the same as a cup of salt, like those things are not equal. So I don't know. I thought it was super smart that if we look at it through that lens, that yeah, uh, women as holistic sort of healers and men as single lane sort of logical thinkers. I don't know if logic is the right
Well,
word.
and like when you were describing that, I kind of went back to a class that I took probably quite some time ago, and who knows what the updates to the research have been. But when looking at like gender studies, that through the communication lens, right? Because that's my background. Like, I'm a communication strategist. Like, I like to figure out the most effective and meaningful ways that produce certain results at communication exchange. And that kind of aligns with one of these concepts that I learned a very long time ago, which was rapport versus report. And that men tended to gravitate towards report talking, which was like boom, 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 boom. And like,
Mhm.
these are the things. And then women tended to gravitate more towards rapport, which is why there's typically so much more like detail and richness in like what is being discussed. And then that would make sense because it's all about the context. It's all about like the holistic, comprehensive look at whatever it is, which would align much more with rapport rather than report do. Like, we have this bullet point and we can go to that. And how can I see some of this information being helpful today in who I'm seeing at public events and things like this. So I work with a team, and in that team, we're really looking at ways to help further public cannabis education. And I find this to be one of the most important areas of all of this cannabis stuff that everybody says that we need more of. Yet there is no, like, who's going to pay for this? Like, who is going to orchestrate this? Who's going to be the source of the providing of this in a neutral way? And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we look at relying on licensed operations for
Mhm.
as the driver for this. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is so controversial and so complex for a lot of people. And the older you are, like the whiter you are, the more, like if you look at the Pew like breakdown of how people feel about cannabis, the older you are, the whiter you are, the more conservative you are, the more religious you are, with a little asterisk there. The more likely you are to be opposed to taking in cannabis information and processing it, because of the bias that comes forward with it, right?
Mhm.
So, and this is not to say that this is everybody, like it's just what some of the data would indicate, right? So when we look at the likelihood of who's taking in this information, there's obviously all of this complexity that comes forward. And it makes sense that if you came of age during a lot of the problematic messaging of that started, actually, it was prevalent in almost every decade of the 20th century, but really took hold in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then it got stronger in a different way in the 80s and 90s. And the rise of the internet, I actually think, has been a major thing that has deconstructed a lot of that. But I don't think we have time to talk about that today. We have
Or
so
two.
many things to talk about all the time. So when you look at that information, and it's so complex that if your immediate response is, it takes you longer to process information from a trusted source about this plant, right? So if the way to break this down is to provide information so that change can happen at the speed of trust, it takes more than an electronic toolkit, a download. It takes more than, a flyer that says this is how you consume safely. And my theory is that it really needs to be an exchange of information so that the other person feels heard, and that it's more of a conversation, and it starts and it goes low and slow. And once the needle moves, then you're not looking to convince somebody to consume. You're just looking at them and helping them to assess the information so that they can make informed decisions for themselves. Like, that's why I engage in this. And it becomes a real challenge to figure out how one does this. And you need money to make things happen, and licensed operations. And there are some really wonderful education providers. There's always this level of, yeah, but you're trying to sell me something. So like, if this concern already exists, there an intermediary helps, right? So as I go out and do these public programs, circling back to these issues in, like gender, and the way that gender has played a huge role, gender and race have played huge roles in all of this cannabis controversy ongoing lots of time. It's actually, I find in my experience, that women are the ones that are seeking out the information about lifestyle and wellness decision making, because of this desire to understand that integrative component, where like looking at the big picture. And I say this because um, uh, in some of these public programs, if there's a woman that has told her husband or partner, or someone, that he needs to come to this program, there tends to be some interest. I can look out in the audience and see more interest from women, and then sometimes there's like some body language that's like, I don't want to be here. And I'm not saying it's true for everyone, but I am finding more women driving the conversation. And I don't know whether it's gender specific. I don't know whether it's lack of frustration when it comes to like women's health issues. And like, you're seeing more right now about perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause, and these topics that are specific to women that can really be alleviated, or at least, like some of the not so good stuff be lessened, and women being made to feel more comfortable as dealing with all of these physiological changes. And there's a lot of evidence that supports that plant medicine, and in particular cannabis, can address some of that. But there's a lot of frustration with not being able to get information from their primary care physician, from their OBGYN, and people that are in the medical field that we traditionally turn to say, like, I want to know more about how to make good wellness decisions and lifestyle decisions. And that's where like more of that tension arises. So like I think your friend's perspective is really interesting because I've never really thought about it that way. But now that I
Well,
kind of track back, I'm like, huh, I can see some evidence of that.
well, and it's like women's issues are, yeah, like we are talking more about menopause, perimenopause, premenopause, PCOS, is that what it's called? The yeah, polycystic ovarian stuff. Um, Menstrual cramps, all of the things that women go through, yes. And cannabis can help with that. But also, we have to remember that women are the decision makers almost exclusively for every family, for the children, for the doctors, they make the appointments. They,
Mhm.
talk to the doctors about the medication. They know how much, like how much they're giving to their kids, their the actual medicine regime that they have to follow for themselves, for their husbands even. Like women do that. Men are not all men, but in general, men are not very good at that stuff. They don't, they rely on their wives to make their doctor appointments or even go with them to the doctor so that they know what so that she knows what he's supposed to do when they get home because he wasn't listening or he forgot or whatever. It is women that make these decisions, and so it's not surprising that women want to know more about cannabis because they're hearing these things. Okay, what's medicinal cannabis? What can it do? Why are people saying that it's better than pharmaceuticals? They will do their due diligence about what this medicine is going to do to my kid, or what this medicine is going to do to my husband, or what this medicine is going to do to me. Like, just like you do with everything. If your doctor says, "Oh, I want you to go on Lipitor." Okay, what's Lipitor? What does it do? What are the side effects? How often do I have to take it? Is it going to hurt my liver? Like women will look into that because they want to know those things, right?
And like I don't know. I think that it's changing a little bit, right? Like where we're at a different place today. And if you compare a married couple in their 30s as opposed to a married couple in their 60s or 70s, obviously like their individual sets of experience and the differences from generation to generation and how we live, it changes over time based on all of these external components, right? So that dynamic I think is even more prevalent in and I'm not, because you never want to be like this is the way it is for everybody. We can just kind of look at the world around us and come to informed conclusions about patterns that we see. And when we look at those patterns, especially the folks that are turning to cannabis that are in that senior population category or are curious about it and looking for a pathway to find plant medicine, either in lieu of pharmaceuticals or to supplement or like augment what they've got going on with their pharmaceuticals. Like we we can't get away from the fact that this is an existing dynamic, and then it is affected by the place that you're at in life and how you were raised and all of this messaging. And I think that you're spot on when you're talking about the realities of how this all plays out. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I see more women driving the conversation to look at part of what the education team and I that work on public cannabis education do is offer something called Green Shoulder. And that is educated guided support and assistance when it comes to consumption of cannabis in a way that works, that sits outside of medicine and talking to your doctor per se, but just the practical sharing of information. And it is more women that are driving the conversations. And some of the time it makes me wonder, as we're tackling legalization topics and things like that, and as you see change over the last few decades, it's like just kind of thinking out loud here, it's at a time where you're seeing more diverse representation from like gender and people of color, and where there are certain areas where it is still overwhelmingly like male in certain industries, in certain representation, government and things like that. You do see some of that shifting, and maybe maybe that has to do with more acceptance of looking at not getting rid of anything, but adding cannabis and plant medicine and more choices. That's all I'm after a lot of the time when it comes to public cannabis education. And then also in the classroom, you're really arming students for the realities of what could be what they're facing in the industry in the future as they're like stepping into their careers. Looking at all of these possibilities and kind of, saying that they're all available choices when it comes to wellness and lifestyle choices. That, you can do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, what's driving a lot of this education is you being able to make an informed decision,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what path you take.
Yep. And I was just thinking about women making decisions for not just their family's health and their own health. We know that they're pumping our food full of chemicals and preservatives
Mhm.
and GMOs. And so a lot of people are taking it upon themselves to have chickens to for for eggs and growing their own food and you know making those decisions to try and avoid some of the nasty crap that this is American centric again. Very very and people are making their own bread and things like that because of gluten intolerance. Really, it's because whatever. But also medicine is ridiculously expensive. Healthcare is ridiculously expensive. Not in New Jersey, but in a lot of states now you can grow your own medicine, right? So women are going to want to know, okay, this is a potential problem solver. Like, what medicine can this replace? If we grow our own, how can we prepare it? Do you have to smoke it? Can I make my own tinctures? Can I make
Right.
my own edibles? If so, how do I do that? And how do I dose it correctly? Like, how do I calculate the dose, right? So I think that might also be another reason why women are so curious about cannabis more so than men potentially, um because of these decisions that they have to make based on economics, based on health, based on all kinds of things, and cannabis really does solve some of those problems. um and if they seek out the education, then they can start to make informed decisions, right?
Right, right. And so there was a study that came out a couple of years ago, and I want to say it was out of the UK, and it was about ultra processed foods,
Mhm.
UPFs, right? And in it, it was found that there was a strong indicator, and I don't have the study in front of me, but in general, the gist of it was a strong indicator that these UPFs can potentially be addictive to people, right? So when you look at the straight up Schedule 1 criteria and that cannabis and sits alongside heroin and LSD and MDMA for these two criteria, which is zero medicinal value and high potential for abuse, and one would argue like the highest potential for abuse because there's no medicinal value. Um, Technically, now that the findings from that study, assuming that they can be replicated and maybe even sometimes in that America centric space, we like things to come from America first. And like we discount some of the
We're number
findings
one. Yeah.
in other countries, despite the fact that they follow standards that we would align with.
Hmm.
And this is super apropos to all of the cannabis stuff, because there's a lot of cannabis research out there that some other countries, Israel, the Netherlands, Canada, can show that we could very much learn from. But we do this, well, like we want to know, and then we get back to this. Well, we can't because it's a Schedule 1. But when you look at those two criteria, UPFs actually meet more of that definition than cannabis ever has and ever will. When it comes to the fact that this concept of addiction and physiological like unhealthy dependence, and I'm not saying that in the cannabis world we don't have to worry about unhealthy relationships with the plant, unhealthy dependence. You have lots and lots of thoughts on cannabis use disorder. Again, we don't have time for that today, I don't think, but like, so when you think about UPFs meeting the definition more closely than what's actually there, and people really becoming empowered in thinking about what they're putting in their bodies, what they're consuming, and what they're putting on their bodies, topicals and like what lotion we put on, and deodorant and makeup, and the things that we expose ourselves to. um, it's a very cool thing that we're living in a time where people are starting to feel that empowerment and move forward to be able to make those informed decisions. And I think that the people in the cannabis industry, and all of the people that have paved the way before us,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I think about it so often where right now I feel so lucky to be able to be in cannabis, in the space, and be doing important work that contributes. But I also think about the person 30 years ago that needed the medicine to be able to make it through cancer treatment, or to deal with a debilitating autoimmune, or all of these kinds of things. And the risk was so insanely high. And when we
Mm-hmm.
look back in retrospect, like, we would not be here today without all of those brave people. Um, and so everybody, and like, there's this like, it makes you want to like laugh and smile and cry all at the same time, because we could be so much further along, and really should be, but we're not. So we have to accept that. And it is it is promising and heartening and encouraging that there are so many people out there that are stepping into that space where they want to educate themselves. And cannabis and other versions of plant medicine are such wonderful resources. We're all just, I think, working so hard to help position a world where it doesn't have to live in this really complicated gray area anymore. It just is. It's just another option that is not taboo, and it's not weird. It's just another thing that we can, consider as we make choices for our health and wellness.
Yeah, can we get there? Because we're not there yet. I mean, we're there.
We are. And then I look at you, like, to go back to where we started, like, that fangirl Yelp moment where, you bringing such balanced perspective and science to the digital space, like, there aren't enough of you out there. That's why I was so excited to meet you in person. And I'm just waiting for when this all becomes normalized. And I think that is why I hold so many people like you in such high regard, because you're helping people that you haven't even met yet. You're helping people that maybe haven't even been born yet, because it's been a whole series of pioneers and people that wanted to put themselves out there for it. And we wouldn't be here today without the people that have assumed so much risk and lost so much, gave up so much.
Mhm.
Um, so even on the hard days in cannabis, and I think that all of the industry would say there are definitely hard days, because the things that are standard function, standard operation, standard expectation for other, any other sector, um, in cannabis, it takes an extra effort, it takes extra heft, extra lift all the time, albeit unnecessarily much of the time. But even on the tough days, I am glad to be here and be surrounded by people who also choose to be here because of the help that's being provided to so many others.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and that's, the whole time that I've been involved in the cannabis space, even starting out my research, the very first question I wanted to answer was, how come when I go to this dispensary and get Blue Dream, it's different from when I go to this dispensary and get Blue Dream? Like, why is that? That shouldn't be the case with any product, really. But why is it so prevalent in cannabis? And so everything that I've done has been for the people, for
Mhm.
answering questions to the consumer. Like, I never did it for science sake. I don't care how the plant makes THC. Like, that's not interesting to me. But there are so many, there's so much we don't know about cannabis. And like you said, there hasn't been a whole lot of record keeping because writing
Yeah.
it down is going to be a big target on your back for I did some illegal shit. And so yeah, I agree. There's not enough of me. And, just having it be federally illegal and having different, this patchwork thing across the United States where can we research it? Can we not research it? Like, we're a federally funded school, so we can't talk about cannabis. Maybe we can talk about hemp. Is hemp the same as marijuana? Like, there's just, you know, uh, it's it's a struggle every day, but every day there's something new.
Preach.
You gotta have a lot of resilience and a lot of determination and a lot of gusto and a lot of thinking outside the box, and you gotta be ready to pave your own path and smash through the red tape, and it's just a constant struggle, but it yeah, like it's pretty fun.
It's always interesting.
So
There's always something happening.
exactly. I I sit in this strange space where like I'm not an academic, but I'm not an industry person either.
Hmm.
And so I feel like I'm not really seriously considered for either. Like I'm overqualified to work in the cannabis industry and I'm underqualified to work in academia or whatever. It's just a strange lane that I'm driving in. So I think I'm just gonna lie, but change my resume to be less academic and educated and more, you know, I know a lot about cannabis kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I very much feel you. Not to the same extent because I mean, a PhD is a PhD is a PhD. And like I feel as though cannabis is very lucky to have you around. And but like I understand that the resistance that so many institutions have to just not wanting to move forward with this, like, and and I can see all of that. And some of the time, are you feeling like maybe your affiliation with cannabis then prevents you from being considered for other, like, more legitimate things?
Yes.
And like that's how we had so many bank issues where there was nothing about us that said cannabis ever. And we were super careful about that, but a little bit of digging. And then we had all kinds of issues where it was an account that was set up that had never taken $1 of cannabis money. And that was never the intention to put $1 of cannabis money in there. But and the bank kind of lied, like verifiably lied to us just to get rid of the problem. And that was just because we kind of smelled like cannabis.
So do you think that your teaching in cannabis is also hurting you?
I don't know. Like I have an interview next week with um a community college that is communications based. Like they wanted like a full-time public speaking instructor.
Hmm.
And um like I'm still going to proceed, and like they did offer me an interview, and because I could see that there were some people looking, so that was a good thing, so they know, so I don't have to fight that. um but I think it's too school. I think it ends up being very individualized. Like either the person is looking at it saying like, "Oh, this is cool," or the person's looking at it saying, "We don't want that kind of person here." Like
Hmm.
I personally don't want to see that kind of person here. And if they're in the decision making role or they have a vote, they're going to and they vote no because I'm attached to the C word, then so I'm just not sure, like, because I can't hide it. I wouldn't want to hide it, but I physically couldn't anyway. Because like Google.
Right. And I'm not even plant touching. Like I've never been really plant touching other than hemp, right? Which is legal. I've always been ancillary education and consulting and, labs, like advising kind of.
Yeah.
So, when we sold our house, the banker did ask, she's like, "Are you in the cannabis industry?" And I was like, "Yes and no. I don't touch any plants and I don't sell any cannabis or marijuana. I'm non-plant touching." And she's like, "Okay, I just wanted to make sure." And she was like, what did she say? Is any of this income from selling cannabis? I'm like, no, no, no. This is all teaching and consulting work.
Right. But even still, I think there's some people that like you, as soon as you say yes, but, or like yes, ancillary, for some people, I think it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's my guess. Those
Mhm.
courses somewhere else. Um, but so many places have turned me down, even from like, hey, like I'm thinking about putting in a course proposal, like just as a one off. University of Delaware wanted nothing to do with the conversation. Like they were very polite. See, and here's the other issue. I'm not going through agriculture. I'm not going through botany or anything that's science based. I'm more
Mhm.
humanities based. And typically that means that the track that I'm in gets, because I went to like the dean of students, and then the dean of students rerouted me to two people, and they were on two different sides. And one was like student health and wellness, and then the other was something else. And like, so the dean was like, these are the people you have to talk to. One of them literally was like, no, thank you. Like, and politely, just like not even willing. And even though the dean sent the information, it was like a, and then the other ones then circled me back to the comm study people, because much of like the stuff that I'm doing is more like communications analysis and stuff like that. Um, so I don't know if there's more inroads, but then for the kind of special area that I tend to focus on, the plant and science people are just not interested, because they're like, that's that's over there. And like I'm trying to get Stockton to even list the integrated media class on um the requirements. So that class isn't even listed as one that's offered.
Weird.
Yeah. But what are you gonna do?
I don't know. And um, have you listened to any of them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you like them?
I do. And Tracy and I were just talking about the energy that you bring.
Oh, is it good?
Fuck yeah, it's good.
Yeah, like I'm learning a lot, and I the thing about it is like I seriously lack in asking people questions. Like I am the kind of person that people will ask questions and I'll answer them all and then I'll forget to ask them anything in return, which I feel like comes across as really fucking rude and arrogant, but it permeates my entire life. Like Brett will come home and he'll be like, "Oh, hey, how was your day?" And I'm like, "Oh, it was pretty good. I was really busy. I did this." Blah, 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 blah." And then he'll go, "Yeah, my day was good too." Because I didn't, like he'll come home and he'll be like, yeah, so the doctor said I'm fine. Like, because I don't even ask. Same thing with my kids, same thing with my parents. Like, it's just not something that I feel like, it's probably a touch of the tism, and I just don't, it's not in the front of mind to ask people things. And even going through grad school, we had seminars every Friday with different speakers and stuff, and I just could never come up with any questions to ask anybody. Like I don't know if I'm not curious or don't care, or I don't know what it is. So I feel like this podcast is sort of bringing me out of my comfort zone, and not just like doing a little bit of research on all of my guests to begin with. Um, I do have a cheat sheet that I printed out with like, okay, if I run out of things to ask, then I've got, these sort of general questions that I could ask anybody.
Mhm.
But yeah, so doing like a little dive on the people that I don't know very well. And then also thinking about questions as people are talking and like writing them down. So I think that it's kind of helping me become a better human.
That's lofty. I like that. And I mean, I can see that. And I can see that stepping out of your comfort zone to do something a little bit different probably is welcome, because, I get the sense that you like to change it up, that you would get bored if you kept doing the same thing over and over again. Is that true?
No, not really.
Really?
Not really. I mean, I worked in pizza for like 15 years, and that's doing the same thing every single day. Working in a lab is doing very repetitive things all day long, every day. I sit down in front of my computer at like 7 or 8 in the morning, and I sit here and I do work until like 5:30 or 6, whenever Brett knocks on the door, because I lock the front door and I forget to get up and open it. Um, like I get in the zone and I just am in the zone, and it doesn't really matter what I'm doing. Like, so this was and I need maybe we should do the introduction at the end and then like I was when I went to do my master's, I asked Mitt, I was like, I think I want to do my master's. He's like, I don't think this is for you. I don't think it's for you. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, I just don't see you doing like, graduate level studies. And he's like, I don't think you would like it. He's like, do you really want to work with, rare plants and cacti? And I was like, yeah, I know that anything that I do, I'll love it. Like I literally love everything that I do. It doesn't matter what it is. I've never not liked a job. I've never not liked doing
Seriously?
that. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's why it seems like you are far more personable than I think you give yourself credit for, because like you're just, there's always something interesting for us to talk about. And you're always bringing something new to the table. That's why I assume that you enjoy variety, because I see you in so many different like through so a bunch of different lenses. And maybe that's part of, maybe it's because of true appreciation for what you're doing, and then you like really get into it and then you know it inside and out.
Oh yeah, that's definitely me. Like I need to know, like I could work at Starbucks and be happy, but I would have to know every single position, every single like I want to make the coffee, I want to make the food, I want to unpack the truck, I want to take inventory, I want to, like I want to work the cash register. Like you name it, I want to know how to do it, and I want to know how to do it well. Like I want to perfect it. And when I worked at Papa John's, like I took that um attitude and
Yeah.
projected it onto all of my people. And so I trained everybody completely backwards to what any other store trained their people as. So if if I hired you as a delivery driver, the last thing you learned was how to deliver a pizza. The first thing you learned is how to answer the phone. The second thing you learned is how to take a pizza out of the oven. The third thing you learn is how to route things like based on where they are located in the town. And the last thing you do is deliver a pizza. So at any time during your shift, if there's nothing to deliver because the line's backed up, it doesn't matter. You can answer the phone. You can take pizzas out of the oven. You can put toppings on pizza. You can put cheese on the pizza. So you never. Oh, and like an in-store, usually they get trained on phones first because that's the first thing that you need to know how to do as an in-store. That's the last thing you learned as an in-store at my restaurant. The first thing you learned was the hardest thing, which is dough. Then you learned how to put toppings on pizza. Then you learned how to take pizzas out of the oven, and then you learned how to answer the phone. So at any time, there's a driver who can answer the phone and you can make the pizza. And the dough is the thing that is like the bottleneck. So everybody got trained on everything. And my whole store, like my whole store, everybody was cross-trained. I think at one point I had 13 employees, 8 of them were managers. And
That's a
I
lot.
would, well, because they didn't at the time have a way to be to have like a driver or an in-store wage. So the drivers were making 750, the in-stores were making like 8 or 9, but
Right.
the drivers would have to like do in-store duties and sometimes, so I was like, well, this is stupid. I'm just going to make you a manager because the manager wage is going to be like $11 and you can do everything. And then, other stores would have only, 2 or 3 managers, and you get a manager who's sick and now you don't have anybody to run your store. And so I
Yeah.
would I would pimp out my managers because it didn't matter if anybody was missing from my crew because my crew ran so well and was so cross-trained that if we lost a driver who was a manager to another store, somebody else could slide right in and take up all the roles that they were doing. So, yeah.
So do you see how you give the vibe of liking lots of different things? Like you see it, right? You just heard it.
I guess so.
Like
I
even though you say like, no, 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 that's not true. And I understand the driver there because you want to do everything well and not have anybody come back and say you are underperforming. That's, I think, part of what's in your soul. You and I align there. But that is why, whether it's intentional or not, you give off the vibe of really liking various variety, diversity in like what you're doing, so that you're picking up on all of it. That's probably why you're so interesting to talk to.
But it's still like a single thing, right?
No, no, you literally just described all those different jobs. Like, yeah, we make pizza, but there's always like you didn't want to be the person that's working the dough, although I find it to be interesting. You're like, that's the hardest part. Like you didn't want to be just the dough girl. Like that wasn't what you gravitated to. You wanted to have mastery of all of it.
Well, yeah, I was the general manager, so, I had to have the mastery of all of it. But I did have to work my way up to that.
I was gonna say, I bet you wanted that and had that before you had that title. I wasn't there, but that's what I would guess.
Yeah. Well, I worked at, a different pizza. Like, I worked at, oh, what was it called? Pizza Pipeline for like 8 years. And, I was all of the things for them as well. And
Did
then,
you get tired of pizza?
still my favorite food.
Okay. I wanted to build in some extra cushion time so I could talk to you because I want to talk to you about hemp things. Um, there's this amazing store called Hemp and Honey in North Jersey, and like it's it's amazing. Like, and I can't get over all of like just how comprehensive the service is and how knowledgeable the staff is, and it's the anti gas station, like
Hmm.
hemp derived, just like all of that kind of thing. And it's he's got such an amazing customer base, and all of this is going to go away as of April, and he's going to have to comply in this state because of the regs. And
Why is it going to go away in April?
when he no longer is able to sell because of the Murphy legislation that got signed that says that essentially, all of these full spectrum CBD products and all of that have to go away.
I don't even know about this.
Oh, it's big and it's terrible. Because so one of the last things that Murphy did was sign in the, getting rid of the intoxicating hemp products, which then like includes all of the things. So like, like you being in the CBD business, you were effectively blocked from doing that. And the whole thing was to get rid of, the gas station weed and,
What does
the
the law
problem
say?
stuff.
Like, because CBD is not intoxicating hemp,
But like, hold on.
and even the full spectrum is not intoxicating hemp.
So, New Jersey tightens rules on intoxicating hemp sales. So, this will align with the federal changes adopted in November of 2025. And so, this update tightens what qualifies as legal hemp and limited intoxicating THC products. So, it's Ruiz and Scutari. And then essentially, the bill expands the definition of THC to variants, including Delta 8, Delta 9, and Delta 10. Additionally, it states that any hemp product with more than 0.3% total THC or any hemp derived product with greater than zero point 0.4 milligrams of THC per container are considered cannabis. And then you have until April the 13th to sell off remaining inventory.
I mean, I mean, that's how hemp has always been defined. Well, not always, but since the final rules went into effect in 2021, it's 0.3% total THC. But the DEA never updated their language in the Controlled Substances Act. It still says 0.3% Delta 9 THC. And so the hemp products are operating in that area, but
Mhm.
really hemp was never meant to be any more than 0.3% total THC. But the zero point 0.4 milligrams per container, that's problematic because if you have, a bottle of tincture, for example,
Mhm.
it can contain less than 0.3% total THC, but it would have more than zero point 0.4 milligrams of THC.
But like a lot of his products, which are sourced carefully, from a bunch of different places with and they're good ones. Like this is like a super reputable place. And this is where people that are alcoholics go to buy their THC, beverages and stuff like that are, ethically made and all of that. He's going to end up losing like a huge chunk of his inventory with the new guidelines.
Yes, but I mean, the people who are operating in that space, um, always knew, and if they say they didn't, they always
Yeah.
knew that it's supposed to be 0.3% THC, total THC. And if they're selling intoxicating products and they're calling it hemp, they knew that was going to go away. They knew that lab-made cannabinoids were not going to fly forever. Like
Well,
Delta 8, Delta 10, THCO, HHC, THCP, those things are not found in the plant in any measurable amount, and they are all made in a lab, right? So, and even, THCV is often made in a lab. Like there's all these products. And even if they're sourced, from reputable sources, even the reputable sources, when you convert those cannabinoids, when you convert CBD into these cannabinoids, there are always byproducts that are made. It's never a super clean reaction. And we don't know what those byproducts are. We don't have standards for those byproducts. We don't have safety information on these byproducts. And so
mhm.
even if you have somebody who is, a legitimate, responsible, hemp supplier with these lab sourced cannabinoids, we still don't have information on it and they're still intoxicating and we don't have data on it. And it makes sense that they shouldn't be operating in the hemp space.
I can see that. And I understand that, but they're not going to have alternatives in dispensaries that are comparable
Why not?
because the dispensaries aren't carrying that.
Right, but these hemp businesses could get a license um as in the marijuana side.
Yeah, but like, I mean, yes, like, but the reality is like,
Or they can move
no,
to a different state that isn't. Like,
right,
Colorado has had on their law books like these products are never going to fly in Colorado. You can't buy any of those products. Hemp products are not allowed in California. Like there are already states that have put their foot down when it comes to these products. And I feel bad for people that are losing their businesses, like the whole of Texas
right.
is screwed.
And that was wild because I never expected that to shake out like that. I mean,
But they
I,
knew. They knew what they were doing. They knew that it wasn't going to last forever. They knew that it was shady ass shit and they were operating in a legal gray area. And I don't agree with how heavy-handed they're trying to be with these regulations. The zero point 0.4 milligrams is stupid. Uh,
mhm,
Calling the seed by what the plant might become is stupid. Seeds are seeds.
right.
They're not intoxicating, and it doesn't matter what that plant may or may not grow into. We don't regulate poppy seeds, you know? So, I do feel bad for the people that are going to lose their businesses, but they knew.
But and I get that. I get that. It's just there's a chunk of the market that will then be boxed out and like pursuing the cannabis license. Like I actually just finished the cannabis training, or actually that's not true. I have one more level to go in the cannabis training academy,
Hmm.
like curriculum. I don't know if you've gone through it, like, because I just wanted to see and I wanted to make sure that the things that I was saying were aligning with reality. And like I worked there on that project for a while and then like going
That's
through this.
Sarah's program.
No, that's the state's program to heed. Um, and the New Jersey Business Action Center and the free, like it's 10 levels and you can do the first three for everybody, but then you have to self-certify to get 4 through 10 and it mirrors the application process. It's free. And it goes through they put out a call for like I guess it was like 2 years ago now, where Jess Gonzalez, you know her, the attorney, she was the one that kind of headed it up. Her and Kelly Weiland, and then they hired like a bunch of people to be the instructors, and it's it's an online asynchronous training exercise for someone that essentially is thinking about getting a cannabis application, and the amount of money that you need to have, like I knew it before, but then looking at even like a lot of what the actual requirements are and what the hoops are when it comes for municipality, approval and all of that, like you just have to have so much money to get into this game here in this state. I imagine that that's true everywhere, unless you have a place that had no regulation. They were like everybody do what they want, and those are the ones that have kind of imploded. Maine,
Hmm. Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, yeah. And I mean, it's just there's chunks of the market that then don't get what they need because there's only so much that a dispensary is going to have the capacity to carry, and their products are really limited
Hmm.
in the big picture.
I mean, those are all good points, but those products are consumables,
Mhm.
right? People are taking them, eating them, smoking them, and they're completely unregulated. Whether you're being responsible with what you carry and sell doesn't really matter. Because these products are, there's no safety data behind them. There's no like no one's regulating it. So, even if you have a COA that looks legit, there's no way to know like if it is or not. Will they let you see the raw data from the chromatogram from the HPLC? No, you'll never get to see that. You know,
Mhm.
um, and when you think about, okay, so maybe patients won't have access to all the products. Well, okay, they have access, and I'm not saying that there's that the regulated industry is doing a great job. There's a lot of
Right.
fake shit as well, but there's literally like there's no regulations on these hemp derived products at all. And when it comes to, health, safety, especially for medical patients, it needs to be regulated in
I
some
agree.
form.
But it's just like there seems to be no good options. Like, you know, because it is looking at some of the data, like so I assume you know that dude Yasha.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like when I went, whatever he was presenting at, where it went over the data from like what was happening with the labs and like the labs in New Jersey that kept saying that like their test results were coming in as like zero, like no presence of any of the bad things. And it's like that's not true. Like it's physically impossible for
Hmm.
all of these things to be true. And you're like, okay, it's just it feels like the consumers, especially particularly the patients at the end of the day, aren't getting what they need.
Yeah, so I talk about this a lot. Like this whole industry has one purpose, and that is to make products for consumers. There is no other reason why anyone is in the cannabis industry. Like we make products for people to consume.
Right.
And yet we're doing this huge disservice by, generating inconsistent and incorrect data and kind of lying, right? We're lying to the consumers saying, there's no mold in this product, there's no heavy metals in this product. This product is 35% THC. We're literally lying to the consumers and they really don't know that they're being lied to. Like Danette just told me that she named the dispensary, but she was like, yeah, so don't go to this dispensary because I just found out that they sell irradiated cannabis that was like, failed mold testing and they like run it through like ozone or irradiate it and then it passes and then they sell it. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like literally everywhere is doing that. She's like, "What?"
Right.
She's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is totally a thing." There are some grows that do it as like a preventative measure, which I think I don't know, like I want to see the data on what does it do to the actual like chemotype of the plant. What is it doing to the terpenes and the cannabinoids and the other, hundreds of components that are in the cannabis plant. But so some people are doing it as a preventative measure, and I think that's okay. And it can be with like UV light or whatever. There are some people who irradiate it before they send it to testing to ensure that it will pass the test. And there's some people that send it in for testing, it fails, they bring it back, they irradiate it, and then send it in again for testing and it passes. So there's like three different ways that people are using these like sterilization or remediation methods that, are questionable and irresponsible and disgusting. in some cases. And no, and people don't know. There should be a sticker or something on there saying this product has been irradiated so that people can make decisions on whether they actually want to consume that product or not. And we're not even being that transparent about it. Um, like Danette was shocked. And then you hear about people like, oh, oh, I don't like the dispensary weed. It just doesn't have it doesn't taste good. It has hardly any smell. Like that's because it's been irradiated more than likely.
Right. And I have heard, though, speaking of a radiated product, that I thought you had to label it if it if it didn't pass, if it failed, and then had to go through the process. Like I thought that that was a requirement that you had to list it, but perhaps I came to that conclusion incorrectly. But if you irradiate from the beginning, like as part of your process, then you do not have to identify it as irradiated. And then you have it, if it's part of like your SOP, like this is how you do it, and it's not in response to something, you're starting off with like a shitty process that then becomes like the standard. So then you definitely don't have to tell anybody because this is what you intended all along. And then it's a CYA on 2 levels. Um, and that doesn't feel good as like the consumer, the potential consumer.
Yeah. I mean, if you went to the grocery store and bought blueberries and they had been, washed in bleach or, something, like you would want to know, like what has been done to these blueberries that I ought to know about, you know?
Right.
Um, yeah, but it's not. It's like the equivalent of, washing the mold off the strawberries and then putting them back on the shelf. That's disgusting. So, yeah.
Preach.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. All right, well, we are, we've been talking for a while now.
I know. But
And
awesome.
I think it's time to wrap it up, Angela. Tell everybody, you've got several different companies that you've formed, education based, consumer focused. Tell people about those and then where they can find you if they need to ask you questions or seek out some education or whatever.
Well, anybody can always ask Anna. Anna always knows where I am. But so I teach at Stockton and I'm a proud Osprey and it's a wonderful program. So I'm always happy to answer questions about, from prospective students or, just in general, what it's like to bring cannabis courses to the higher education environment. And I love talking about it because it's still surreal. I feel grateful every day that I get to walk into college classrooms and help students understand a subject that is that needs to be like demystified in really good ways and really not so good ways all the time, right? So there's that. And then I'm also the founder of Elucidation Strategies. And we are a cannabis education company that helps people and organizations make good choices about cannabis. And we really tackle this work on 3 levels. So we started out in a public programming community kind of education space, and that seemed to be necessary, and I feel like it's still very necessary across New Jersey and beyond. And many of the decisions that happen on a policy level that then affect communities and municipalities, and who's making decisions about licensed operations being able to come in and set up shop, and all of the restrictions that exist around that. And then what I was also finding when this effort was started was that yes, we can go to the Google box for all kinds of things and learn about terpenes and cannabinoids and cannabis use disorder and scromiting, which has been in the headlines more. But much of that tends to produce more questions than answers, and you can find a lot of contradictory information. So that becomes a challenge. So we wanted communities to feel like they had a place to turn to, especially as new marketplace in New Jersey was being set up, and we're gaining some visibility when it comes to surrounding states that are coming online, because there are not a ton of options there for practical real life information. And it was actually through that we discovered that the industry, both licensed operations and ancillary operations, needed support in helping communities piece together that education component and that engagement component, because stigma is so real. So we started out really looking at communities. We made sure to address some concepts when it comes to education and community engagement in the industry. And then what we didn't anticipate until we got in there and started working was that there are 1 million consumption questions from a lot of folks that are frustrated because they don't want to trust their grandson for cannabis information. They're scared, and they're not having productive conversations with healthcare providers. And then you can turn to the internet, but as we've talked about, it can be tough, especially when you want more information about the reality of cannabis. And it was a lady who was at one of the public presentations that I was doing, and she walked up. She made her husband come up with her. And they were there for the whole thing, but in a couple of hours together, she had a notepad like filled with questions. And so this is really, and this has happened over and over again. So this isn't an isolated incident. And that's actually how our more individually focused service offering, Green Shoulder, was born, because it was a woman that said, we're just really scared. We're not doing this as a source of medicine at this time, although we've now had some really good conversations about cannabis and wellness. And that is how Green Shoulder, our supported cannabis consumption service, was born. And so the way to think about that is, if you wanted to learn more about a certain type of cooking style, maybe you bring in a chef that teaches you and your friends more about how to approach that, or you wanted to learn more about wine tasting, or pepper, like hot pepper and hot sauce, in the advent of the gentleman that does all the stars that eat hot wings.
Mhm.
I've heard
Sean
that there's
Evans.
been, yes, I've heard there's been a surge in like interest in like all the Scoville, like learning and like learning different things. So when you want to do that and feel more comfortable, we have a really accessible, fun, laid back, safe process where we help adults consume adult use products with some education and fun built in. And so those kinds of education efforts, I work with a really wonderful team across New Jersey and beyond, and we just want to help people make those informed decisions. And so that's how elucidation and its three-prong, kind of effort focuses on education throughout each different distinct need.
Mhm.
So as far as how to find me, I welcome LinkedIn connections, and the elucidationstrategies.com is our website. And we also have free downloads and resources there. So anybody that wants to talk cannabis, I'm your gal. So invitation always open. And Anna, invitation always open to you, obviously. Obviously.
You, I'll take you up on that. All right, Angela, it's been real. Love talking to you, and I think we need to have a second sesh. But thanks for your time today, and it was so great to see you again.
It was so great to see you. Thanks for having me. Good talk.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, catch you later.
Sounds good.
All right, bye.
Bye.